Is Taiwan's decades-old silicon shield under the worst pressure it's faced in its history? But rather than this pressure coming from China, is a threat coming from the US, which is pushing Taiwan for a 50-50 split in Taiwan-US-based chip production? Watch.
So in the trade world, it's called the silicon shield. Like, we need their silicon, the chips, so badly that we'll shield them, we'll protect them. And so my argument to them was, well, if you have 95%, how am I going to get it to protect you? You're going to put it on a plane? You're going to put it on a boat? We need enough production. So the idea that I pitched them was, let's get to 50-50. We're producing half, and you're producing half.
For decades, it was thought that Taiwan was protected from potential attack by the understanding that it produces the world's most advanced semiconductors, making a Beijing invasion highly risky to China's own economy as well as the world's. So, if this US arrangement is about protecting Taiwan, will the United States offer Taiwan a security guarantee, for example, like that just offered to Qatar? Plus, Taiwan says Beijing is laying the legal case for an attack with its doubling down of isolation of Taiwan on multiple fronts. But is that legal warfare going nowhere? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Min Kavat. To discuss these stories and more, we are joined by Wen-Ti Song, Atlantic Council Global China Hub Non-Resident Fellow. Also, we have Hongren Wang, National Cheng University Political Science Professor. And finally, Marco Mesger, Neumünster Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. A very warm welcome to Professor Wang, and also welcome back Marco and Wen-Ti today. So now, despite Howard Lutnick's assertion that Taiwan is willing to commit to producing half of its entire chips in the US in that interview, Taiwan's Vice Premier Li-chiun says this was not discussed by trade negotiators and Taiwan will not agree to it. Watch.
我想这是美方的想法哈，我方谈判团队从未做出晶片55分的承诺，请大家放心。那这一次我们也没有讨论这一项的议题啊，那我们也不会答应这样的条件啊，请大家放心。
Now, the value of Taiwan's foundry business is $141 billion per annum, which is 18% of Taiwan's GDP. Marco, so help us to, how should we understand this proposal, if we want to call it that, by the US?
Well, I think it's a wish, right? TSMC is a publicly traded company, so they need to make decisions for their investors, for the interest of their investors. 50% is quite bold, because you need to understand TSMC has 14 fabs here in Taiwan, building 3 fabs in Japan, I think ultimately 6 in the USA and 1 in Europe. So they manage all this at the moment to please the different regions based on their focus of products. And USA is mainly AI.
So you were saying that essentially the arrangement at the moment, and I assume that you're also talking about the incorporating the $100 billion commitment from TSMC for new fabs as well. You said that that should satisfy the demand from the US.
Well, I think the number is 165 billion, right, because the final stage would be up to 6 fabs, right? So I believe for the USA, the biggest interest is at the moment to focus on these AI design chips, that they have a self-sufficient supply chain on their land, on their soil. So I think the goal to have 50% of the production there in the USA, I think is not doable.
To summarize what you're saying is that the 50% will go far and beyond what the US actually needs for its chip demand.
That's what I would say.
Okay, Wen-Ti, so how would you therefore characterize this bargaining stance from Washington?
I mean, politically, we know Trump administration is always about so much winning, right? So much winning that you get tired of winning. Well, I think one way Trump goes about delivering so-called winning to the American voter, especially to his political base, in places like Rust Belt, Sun Belt, Southern State, is to bring manufacturing jobs back. Politically, we know why it makes sense for Trump administration to be doing some tough talk, including in public, because it plays very well for America's domestic politics. However, I think I agree with Marco that it's really only a starting bit.
Do you believe, Wunti, that they're talking about 50-50 of the US's demand or globally?
I think he's talking more about TSMC's chip production in general. He wants close to half of it to be.
So you're talking about the global production from TSMC?
That seems to be my perception, judging from what's being out there. Yes.
Okay. Professor Wang, what are the other considerations for Taiwan moving away from the purely chips? I mean, why has Taiwan outright said it will not agree to these figures? You know, is this about economic sovereignty?
From Taiwan's perspective, I think such terms would be unacceptable. I mean, both politically and domestically. I think the current ruling party will try to persuade the current Washington proposal is based on false assumptions. The local factories in the United States, in Japan, in Germany, they will not control the data. The data will be totally controlled in the headquarters in Hsinchu, in Taiwan. So I mean, I think maybe the Secretary of Commerce, Lutnick, he just want to make these negotiation pressures on the Taiwan side. He doesn't understand the whole, for example, the geopolitical issues, the whole natures of the semiconductor factories. So I think that's the problem.
But he did talk about the silicon shield there in that bite that we showed. He's aware of that. Let me bring in Marco. So on that point, Marco, we've watched the Lutnick interview in full. Does the US actually have a point that why would you put all your eggs into one basket?
So I think in Germany, Europe has a very different approach, so to say. So in Europe, it's called ESMC. So TSMC go to Europe, and then Bosch, Infineon, and NXP, they share 30% of this company. And then the German government gives subsidies, welcoming, and not with bullying or pressing TSMC to come. It's a different market. It's mainly industrial and automotive. But basically what the European government, the German government has said, they are holding it up. The big challenge, I think, in the US is that it's very unpredictable. You know, they let drop, obviously, some statements which have not been discussed before and see how people react. And then they see how they can make something out of it, how they can negotiate. So in Japan, you have 2 fabs at the moment, and potentially a 3rd fab, which will be built up there. But again, you go there also because of specific customers. TSMC had all decades before, they had global customers, but never go out of Taiwan. So I think a big step for them was going out, going to where their customers are and building up connections around the world. To give you some idea, to build a fab, you need like 15 to 20 billion US dollar. This decision you make not like this. You need to think about, anticipate, how is the market, where are my customers? And so I think for TSMC, it's quite challenging to see if commitments are questioned. So because originally they come because of CHIPS Act and customers, and then the Trump administration comes and try to spin it with other purposes, even force them to go together with Intel.
Okay, so on that point, if this is purely about protection, is the logical progression to discuss a security guarantee, perhaps like what Trump has offered Qatar? We're showing it now on screen. It says, the United States shall regard any armed attack on the territory of Qatar as a threat to the peace and security of the US. In the event of such an attack, the US shall take all lawful and appropriate measures, including diplomatic, economic, and, if necessary, military actions. Do you believe that this is purely about the US's fear of a China attack, this move?
For me, it sounds like a negotiation tactic much more than a straightforward provisional security guarantee per se. I think, yes, the US Commerce Secretary talks about something along the lines of, we protect you guys, right? Therefore, we expect a better deal on the semiconductor and other trade fronts. But protection comes in many forms. It could be diplomatic cover, it could be just helping to ensure the normal functioning of the international market and economic infrastructure and what have you. So I think what he was talking about was much more about political assurance for Taiwan rather than a security guarantee.
Professor Wang, would you agree with Wunti's analysis there? And can Taiwan not make it about protection? in the security sense?
I think we need to rephrase the issues because let's go back to my earlier question that I don't think Lutnick, he understands the issue of geopolitics. That means in the real world times, you cannot separate the combat zones from United States. I mean, Taiwan actually, even if far away from United States, but actually right now we are integrated with each other. I mean, in terms of the combat zones. So that means United States, I mean, right now they have this proposal to have a 50-50 split. That means they think in the real world time they can maintain or keep the rest of 50% of productions in terms of the semiconductor chips. But I mean, that's the totally false ideas because in the compact zones, that will be effective with each other. So as long as
so those operations in the US will be hit if Taiwan is hit?
Will be influenced. So that's about the supply chain issues.
Yeah, and South Korea obviously makes many chips as well and would be affected. But I want to press you on this, Professor Wang. Should Taiwan not say that? If they've come out with their bargaining stance, they said 50-50 of global production, not just the production for the US market. So is that fair game for Taiwan to say, well, okay then? How about a security guarantee?
Yeah, I think we can have a very firm position, but we can show our willing to cooperate with the United States instead of showing very confrontational approach to the United States. That means I think we can explain to the United States that these protection ideas should not be one-sided. So right now, the United States, they have this idea or they have this belief that United States protect Taiwan's securities. But we need to tell them that Taiwan also protect your maritime securities, your commercial securities in the Taiwan Strait, because Taiwan Strait is not only for Taiwan its own or for China, it's for the international societies. So we are in the position of first chain lines. So I think that's important in terms of military and economic issues.
But let's move on to another point. Let's listen to Howard Lutnick again on Newswatch.
When I walked into this department, the United States of America had 2% market. We were producing 2% of the chips we need. And my objective when I leave is 40%. Now that's Herculean. Everybody tells me it's impossible. It would require investment in America of north of $500 billion. And we'd have to get everybody, and you have to get the whole supply chain, because imagine if you do A and B and C and you forget D. You don't really have an alphabet, right? You need the whole 26 letters. So we're going to bring the whole supply chain in.
Marco, so, is this actually just about America first in terms of chip production? And should what happened to the Japanese chip industry at the end of the 1980s, 1990s be a cautionary tale for Taiwan?
It's interesting that he said what we need, right? He wants to get 40% of what they need. But what do they need? For what type of consumption is it? Because if you think about a lot of the US companies are international companies. So they're not only selling to the US customer base. In fact, some of them selling much more outside the USA. Does he mean, okay, he wants to have for Americans like an iPhone made 100% in the USA and all the rest of the world can it get produced in Taiwan? Or, what's the meaning? There's a lot of ambiguity. And unfortunately, it's a lot of populism, what the Trump administration is always doing. Taiwan has such a strong semiconductor industry, and it's not built overnight. It's built over 40 years with a plan from government, from institutions. So to copy this, you can maybe make an advanced packaging fab and you can make a front-end fab, but the whole ecosystem, what is around, you cannot so easily copy, even for the Koreans. The Koreans are very good in memory, but for example, for foundry, they are struggling. TSMC has made this to perfection. I think that's why TSMC is everywhere welcome. And I feel, as an external view, I feel like this company has done so great in technology, they should not be forced that you have to do something, because it's a technology company. You work with other companies together to make the industry better, but not somebody tells you, oh, you have to do this. This is, for me, very insulting for TSMC.
Wunti, so how hard will it be for Taiwan to agree to a deal with Taiwan and the US, to agree to a trade deal?
I think one important thing here is that Taiwan can try not to push back per se, but Taiwan can try to gently nudge the US. We know that Trump administration is pretty transactional in nature, and if you push it too hard, you might even potentially get to a moment where Trump used to say to Ukraine, for example, guys, you have no cards. So you don't ever want to get onto the bad side of Trump administration per se. What you can do, however, is to say, yes, I get you are transactionalist. Yes, I get interest matters. And in fact, Taiwan is exactly the kind of partner you can do business with, that you can have a mutually beneficial trade deal with. Let's work it out. I think that would be a much more positive attitude towards managing Trump in negotiation, be it security or trade.
Now, Taiwan says China is trying to create the legal basis for a future attack on Taiwan with its misleading interpretation of Resolution 2758. Taiwan's foreign ministry said this aims to create a legal basis for altering the status quo across the Taiwan Strait and for a future military assault against Taiwan. In his National Day address, Chinese leader Xi Jinping called on his country to firmly oppose, quote, Taiwan independence separatist activities. Watch.
要深化两岸交流合作，坚决反对台独分裂行径和外部势力干涉，坚决捍卫国家主权和领土完整。
China has released a position paper confirming support for Resolution 2758 on their National Day, rebuking the West for supporting Taiwan's inclusion in international organizations. The actual text of UN Resolution 2758 does not mention Taiwan's status nor that Taiwan is part of China. It says only which government will represent the China seat at the UN. It says General Assembly decides to restore all its, that's Taiwan's, rights to the People's Republic of China and to recognize the representatives of its government, China's, as the only legitimate representatives of China to the UN and to expel forthwith the representatives of Chiang Kai-shek from the place which they unlawfully occupy at the UN. So, Professor Wang, now China's use of lawfare is very sophisticated, is very well known as well. Would you say that China has intensified its campaign this year?
I think that's true. Because this I think from the Chinese perspectives, they are seeing this rising support from the United States as well as other European countries to push Taiwan has more active participations in the international societies. So that's one point. And second point, for the recent release position papers from AIT and from the Secretary of from the State Department, from United States State Department, that's kind of give China these discourse pressures in the international organizations. Finally, I think China feel that Taiwan's international propaganda or international discourse has placed a long-term threat to its unification programs. So because of these multiple factors, China intensifies its propaganda warfare in international societies.
Monty, in terms of China's lawfare, why has it drowned out, for example, UN principles in international, like the right to self-determination for Taiwan, even what's within the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, which specifies that China must act peacefully towards Taiwan in order for the US to recognize it?
Yeah, I think this is why China constantly frames Taiwan as a domestic matter to China. That's how it tried to justify to other countries, or maybe not even convincingly justify, but at least to give other countries who are fence-sitter a bit of an off-ramp.
But that's all coming from China's perspective. What I'm saying is, why hasn't, Taiwan and its friends pushed back on that narrative?
I would say Taiwan has tried to rebut Chinese narrative about UN Resolution 2758 for sure, to say how it doesn't really say anything about Taiwan's right to have a play at the UN down the road for sure. And of course, it's a tricky balance for Taiwan because on the one hand, Taiwan wants to say that it has right to decide its own future. At the same time, the ethnic self-determination clause, Taiwan sometimes doesn't feel like it's necessarily applicable to Taiwan as well, because Taiwan government does say that it's already independent in all meaningful sense of the word, and therefore it's not something that needs to be really exercised either.
Right. Okay. Now we'll cover the last question very, very briefly. Taiwan Foreign Minister Lin Chia-lung, on an extraordinary globe-trotting tour, had this message at the Warsaw Security Forum in Poland.
Taiwan is also committed to work hand in hand with our European allies. It is high time for Europe to stand with Taiwan to forge a robust coalition for our shared values and halt the expansion of authoritarian regimes. Taiwan is ready to work with Europe. Is Europe ready to work with Taiwan?
Lin has completed a series of visits, including to Europe, Japan, and the Philippines, as well as participating in an event on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. Professor Wang, is this, new call to action? Well, is it new? And is this, therefore, a change in Taiwan's strategy, sort of a shift to taking on more agency on the international stage?
I think it's not so new, but if you want to say new, I think it's new in a new context. That means for the political context, you see the United States is placing its tariff on multiple countries. So Taiwan and the European countries, we are facing the similar pressures from the United States. So at this moment, I think Minister Lin's visit to Europe, not only European countries, but he just come back from New York and come back from the Philippines. But this moment, I think he tried to get more support for Taiwan, and that creates a certain space. This space, actually, the Washington is not prioritizing in the fields such as energy issues, green energy issues, and the carbon issues. So that's kind of Taiwan's advantages. We can work with our European partners. So that's one point. And second point, that's in the old context means that I think China's threatening posture is rising, but it's not a new thing. So I think the European partners, they also feel this need to try to reduce these reliances on the supply chains in mainland China. So that's not only about the security issues, that's about how you can make these economic diversifications successful. And I think Taiwan is a very reliable partners in terms of these supply chains issues.
And Marco, final question. I want to just bring in the situation in Gaza. What we saw was countries from around the world coming together, well, the final ones that do not or did not recognize a Palestinian state. They came together and they did that. They pressured the US, Donald Trump, and then now he has taken action to stop, or at least to negotiate a ceasefire with Israel. What do you think, to what extent can Taiwan sort of leverage its sort of diplomatic tech diplomacy, its soft power diplomacy, you're from Germany, to sort of break through, to establish a coalition of support?
I think especially with Gaza, I think the pictures, what you have seen there, this leaves for people like a very, very strong impact. And I think that's where people feel the empathy or the pain, where they want to have a stop. So that's probably a little bit a different setup than when you look at Taiwan. And I think,
although one is, a conflict that has been ongoing.
Right.
And this is the conflict that essentially the world says it wants to deter.
Right. Right. But again, as I said, these pictures are very visual, right? So you don't see this with Taiwan. And I think everything, if you look for people, when they look at Taiwan, you have a currency, you have a passport, so you have a lot of these things already there, but you don't have the acknowledgement, and which is a pity to see when you go into these international organizations. But it's a different story, to get people really up and to speak than for Taiwan in this matter, because you don't have, let's say, this final stage, what you see in Gaza, which is going on for 40 years.
So you're saying the world probably needs to see that sort of
I hope not.
devastation before they actually act. Okay. We're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Won Ti-sung, Wang Hongrun, and Marco Mezger for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.